Now, Asia First on CNA 938.
We were talking to each other about our Singaporean love for complaining. I try not to.
Yes.
I try my very best because I've been in the service line before.
Have you?
Yes. As a part-timer, I know what it's like. That struggle is real. So I try to put myself in their shoes. I try to empathize, always try to figure out the reason for, bad behavior, bad response, negative response. I try my best.
Right. I'm with you as well in that regard, because sometimes the instinct to complain, it's very human, right? It's spontaneous, it's instinctive, it's driven very emotionally.
Yes.
And as you mentioned, sometimes we got to catch ourselves consciously. I think there's a difference between complaining and giving feedback.
Yes.
Right? But, many Singaporeans will readily admit that we do have something of a complaint culture.
Yeah, not proud of it, but we are willing to admit it, yes.
Mr. Lee Kuan Yew himself, he is quoted as having said this. He said that the Singaporean is a hardworking, industrious, rugged individual, or we would not have made the grade. But also let us recognize that he is a champion grumbler. I like that quote. I really do. It really reflects the reality of how well he understood as Singaporeans.
Yeah, so we know that we love complaining on top of eating and shopping. It's the unofficial national pastime for more than a few of us. But one academic who wrote a commentary on CNA this week says that complaining is not necessarily an inherently bad thing. It could be a double-edged sword.
That's right. Jonathan Sim joins us now. Jonathan is Associate Fellow of the NUS Teaching Academy and a lecturer with the Department of Philosophy at NUS. Jonathan, thanks so much for joining us on Asia First.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Now, you sound very chirpy, very positive and optimistic already on air. You don't sound like a complainer, but of course, that's just the first 3 or 4 words that we heard from you. All of us, I think, have a complainer deep down inside of us. But complaining, as Andrea and myself, we were just chatting, it's not unique to Singapore. Complaining exists everywhere. Other countries may have something of a complaint culture as well. But many Singaporeans would readily admit that it is rather a prominent trait here. What do you think are the origins of Singapore's perceived complaint culture?
Sure. I think what's interesting is on social media, a lot of Singaporeans say we complain because we feel powerless or we feel disempowered. But, we complain about our friends sometimes. Are we actually powerless or disempowered by our friends? That's not really the case, right? So I think it has a lot to do with another cultural dynamic that we have in Singapore, which is we don't dare to say the things we want to say to certain people, either because we don't want to make them feel bad, we don't want to hurt the relationship, or we feel that it's not in our place to say this to that person.
Andrea's smiling. She knows exactly what you're talking about. Andrea, tell us your thoughts. Please go ahead.
Yeah, no, okay. So I see this all the time with my students and even with my colleagues. Sometimes we want to say something to someone, but we don't dare to say it for various reasons. But we still want to feel validated in one way or another. So that it directs us to air our complaints to someone else. So that really is what I feel, I think is driving our own complaint culture.
Do you think, though, that can be seen as a trait of passive aggressiveness?
Yes and no. I think there's a lot of worries about what negative feedback, even if it's good feedback, right? Like on how to improve. There's always worries like, will my friends see me any less? Will our relationship go sour? Will my boss think less of me? So there's a lot of fear on the repercussions. And I think what we need to learn is how can we complain in a positive way? How can we give feedback in a way that works well for both the complainer and the recipient of the complaint? Yeah.
All right. And we want to explore a little bit more of that with you in just a little bit. But usually when we talk about complaining, it's always in a negative light. But you also wrote in your commentary that complaining could have certain psychosocial benefits. Tell us more.
Yes. Okay. So imagine we're in the room right now, okay? The same room together. And suddenly you smell a bad smell in the room. But the rest of us, we are behaving very normally. Like we don't feel like there's anything wrong. after a while, you start to wonder, am I crazy? Am I smelling something bad? So you feel a need to air your unhappiness about the situation. Hey, I think that there's a bad smell. Do you smell it too? If we all say no, you suddenly feel more crazy, right? You feel very isolated.
Right.
But if we join in your complaint and say, yeah, you know what? I actually smell something. Oh, it's so bad. Then you feel validated in your experience. And this is really at the heart of what why we complain. We want that validation. We want people to say, yes, you're not alone. We feel it together with you. Yeah. So that is the psychosocial benefits that whenever people complain, they're looking for that listening ear and to know that they're not alone.
Yeah, it must somehow stem from, and I'm about to get a bit more philosophical here, but I think
Sure,
it
sure.
stems from the fact that Singaporeans are not, they're quite conflict averse, and they're not very good with any kind of feedback, like you said, negative or otherwise. We don't know how to sort of confront something directly and in a straightforward manner. So that can seem like, oh, okay, we need to feel like we're part of a tribe. Am I on the right track here?
Yes, that's right. And I think maybe some parts of the disempowerment comes from us not knowing how to bring up the topic in the appropriate way. Yeah, I learned this concept in education. Yeah, it's called feedback literacy. Yeah, and it's basically the giver of the feedback, which is the teacher or the supervisor, also needs to learn how to deliver it in a way that the recipient, the student or whoever, can understand and appreciate better. Yeah, so it's actually a process of education for both the complainer and the recipient of the complaint. Yeah, and I think that's something that we can look into as well. Ever since I learned about this, I've been learning how to give better feedback to my students so that we really learn and grow together. And it actually starts from that environment of trust. Earlier on you said sometimes we complain because we feel that anger. So when people feel that anger, they don't feel that trust is there. So for our complaints, our feedback to really be effective, we need to first establish trust that the comments that we are saying is coming from a place of care, coming from a place of concern.
Right,
Yeah.
right. You spoke about your students, young people, young adults. When we tend to engage in complaining, or at least this complaint culture that we have in Singapore, it's typically driven by us adults who engage and indulge in it more. I'm wondering as well, and you brought this up also in our chat earlier, how this can make an impact, an unconscious perhaps impact on the younger generation, teenagers, even children who tend to be more impressionable. What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, many times we just complain without realizing that. Sometimes we say that there are no victims. I'm just airing my complaints, but actually there are victims, and it's the youths. Right now I teach 1,000 students every year, right? And I'm seeing more and more students who are so harsh towards themselves. Like they make one small mistake, no one's upset, but you can see they're shaking with anger at themselves because of that one little mistake. Now, where is that lack of self-acceptance coming from? It didn't come out from a vacuum. It's coming out from the lack of self-acceptance from the people around them. Just the other day, right, I was on the bus and there was this father around my age carrying his small child. He was blocked by someone on the bus and he squeezed his way through. And after that, he started saying very loudly, "Stupid, stupid." And then the child, young infant, started echoing, "Stupid, stupid." Children pick up from us when they see that the adults are complaining, they cannot accept so many imperfections around them. The children start to say, "Oh, if I am just as imperfect, my parents are going to complain about me." And over the years, they internalize that harshness towards themselves.
This is as good a time as any to ask you that is this the point where complaining becomes poisonous or an addiction, even detrimental to someone?
Yes. And I really started paying attention to this when, actually, this all started when overseas friends started saying, I feel uncomfortable in a Singapore working environment because the Singaporeans complain too much. Then I was like, oh, isn't this a universal thing? Don't we need to let off steam?
Yeah.
But then I shared this with friends, and when we couldn't, I had this challenge. I said, okay, well, let's try not to complain. Let's talk about some positive things going on. We actually had struggled to find something good to say.
Oh no.
Yeah, it's not that we didn't have good things in our lives, but it made me aware that the more we complain, the more attuned we are to all the negativities around us. That we don't know how to be we don't know how to be grateful to about the good things around us. Well, I have a certain checklist that I do now, which is how many times in a day am I complaining versus how many times am I talking about other more productive things. And it's the first thing I do when I wake up to complain. Like the other day, I had brunch with someone, and the table next to me, this early in the morning, we're having breakfast, right? The person is bitterly complaining about everything in her life.
Oh
and
no.
I think if we wake up early in the morning and the first thing that comes out of our mouths is our complaints, then maybe we are victims or ourselves of excessive complaints. And perhaps just by pausing, trying to hold back our complaints and exercising gratitude, just saying, yeah, I'm grateful for these little things despite the imperfections, that can help us to reorientate our perception towards things.
Absolutely.
So we become a bit more accepting of ourselves and of others.
Gratitude
Yeah.
and empathy.
Yes.
Yes, that's right.
In basic psychological terms, the thing that you focus on more becomes more prominent and larger for you. That's essentially what you're saying, right? Because complaining is
Yes.
such an unconscious thing that so many of us indulge in. We naturally tend to focus on it more, and it becomes so much more prominent in our minds, in our subconscious minds as well. It shapes our attitudes towards other people, about other people.
Exactly. So the more we complain, the more negative our attitudes and perceptions will be. And the more we try to hold back and exercise gratitude, the more we start appreciating the good things that people are doing around us, the more we become happier and content also of what's going on in our lives. I'm not saying to accept every imperfection that happens, but I think perhaps some of us, we do need to have a more balanced perspective so that we can be less harsh towards others and ourselves.
Indeed. I agree 100%. Let's talk about something now that's relatively difficult for us to do. And I think you've admitted to it as much as well. How do we engage in healthy complaining instead? I mean, there is, as Joel prefaced earlier in the conversation, the difference between complaining and constructive feedback, or any kind of feedback just delivered in a pleasant way.
A well-intentioned way.
Yeah. So how do we then engage in healthy complaining then?
Sure. I think firstly, we can recognize that it's okay to be angry and upset. Yeah, those are perfectly valid feelings. But we shouldn't be quick to rain down righteous anger on people just because we're upset. Yeah, because sometimes when people appear rude to us, it's because of miscommunication. And I'm becoming more sensitive to this, that oftentimes rudeness is first and foremost a case of miscommunication. But at the same time, for healthy complaining, I think one thing that helps is for us to identify what exactly do we want change, improve, for things to be better. And then how can we communicate it in a respectful way? So one thing, counselors like to say is, what would you say if this happened to your best friend? So if your best friend is the recipient of your complaint, your feedback, how would you say in a way that wouldn't hurt your best friend?
Yeah. That's a good tip to have. And I think also, just for me personally, it's trying to put myself in the other person's shoes, wondering that I always believe there's a reason for someone behaving a certain way. It might be at home, something that's happened at home, something in their personal lives that have sort of manifested in a workplace setting. And, they do things and say things that they don't mean. So perhaps that's also something else that we could look at. Do you think?
Yes. In fact, actually this week I'm conducting teaching assistant training for my students to be TAs, right? And I've been giving them scenarios in which students might ask questions or might be perceived as misbehavior, right?
Right.
And I always say, okay, let's pause and consider, what if they're actually sincere in their question? They don't mean to be rude, they're actually sincere. What do we do then? So a lot of them are quite surprised, like, really? People can be sincere in asking something like this? And I say, yes. So Many times the things that really gets us very upset are situations where we cannot see how people can be sincere or genuine when they say or do certain things.
Yeah.
So it helps for us to pause and, as you said, empathize and see in their shoes how that might be possible.
Yeah, putting aside our own biases, I think that's the key to this, especially if you're in a position like yourself where you're teaching. And for us as journalists as well, we have to make sure that, everything we report is balanced. There's always a reason to the other side responding in a certain way. Jonathan, it has been so enlightening to speak with you about this. I guess being a complainer is not that bad after all, but we just have to be watchful of how we respond to others. Wouldn't you say?
Yes. I myself have been learning how to give better feedback to my own students to help them to grow. And I think if we ourselves learn how to be better complainers, I think we can be better feedback givers to others as well.
Hey, we're going to add that to our New Year's resolution to be a better complainer. Jonathan, thanks very much for your time. It's been lovely to have you.
Thank you for having me.
That's Jonathan Sim, Associate Fellow of the NUS Teaching Academy and a lecturer with the Department of Philosophy at NUS. Now you can read his commentary. It's out on CNA.Asia. Look out for the title. Is Singapore's complaint culture helping us or hurting us?